Let's do something different today. Let's not play a game. This has been something I've been wanting to try out for a while now. So, we're gonna be reading a book for a change. That's right, we can read. First of all, let me just check the audio. The audio. Okay, seems okay, but we don't have to worry about the game audio this time. We just have to worry about ourselves. So basically, I am going to be reading J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. First of all, how well do I know this book? Not much. I've seen the movies, so I do know what's going to happen. So feel free to spoil things. But I don't think I've ever seriously written the book before. I've tried it. Before the movies came out, I tried to read the book to prepare for the movie. I think that must have been like 10 years ago because the first movie came out in 2012. Yeah, something like that. So it's been a while. I don't think I understood a lot of it at the time, so maybe I'll do better. Really, I can't think of a lot of details that were different from the movies. I know the movies pretty well, both the Hobbit movies and the Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Ring trilogy is my favorite movie trilogy of all time. But I do know that the books will be different from them for quite a bit, and especially this one, The Hobbit. The movies were like in total 9 hours long, but the book is relatively short. It's a children's book. It wasn't written to be published, but it was published and it was popular, and it became a lead into the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the trilogy of books. But the movie was like a prequel, so they tried to make it more epic. But it's at its heart still just a children's tale, and I think the movie version it had a bit of a clash of style. So yeah, this is the Hobbit. We're just gonna get into it. I'm reading this on my computer screen, by the way. I have it on ebook. You're not gonna see me hold a physical book in my hand. I do like physical books. I would read that if I had one, but I just don't have uh, a lot of space to store a lot of books, and I do tend to move every few years. So if you've moved before, you know how much of a bitch it is to move books. So whenever I have to do that, I'm thankful that I don't have a lot of physical books. But other times, I kind of lament that my bookshelf is does not have a lot of books. It has games and some other stuff that I use, face masks, which is something I have to grab every time I go out these days. Unfortunately, um, well, enough dabbling. Let's go turn on the Hobbit and wow, it opened with a map. Let me just screenshot this and grab it for you guys. Whenever there's this is the advantage of using ebook rather than the physical book is that I can screenshot stuff. And I'm not I've considered actually just to capturing the screen of the book's content, but I think maybe that'll be a bit too far in terms of copywriting. So I decided not to do that. So if you like have knowledge on this topic, like maybe it's actually okay to do that. If you I don't know, crop it a little bit, just let me know. Let me know at what point is it okay to show the content of a book and what point it's not. So for now, I'm just not gonna risk it. There you go. This is the. I'm sure it's okay to show this. This is the map, a troll's map that opened the book. It's really interesting. You see, you know what? I think I've seen an ASMR channel about a guy just drawing this map. Is a really talented person. Just look on YouTube. Search for I don't know ASMR drawing the map of Middle Earth. I'm sure you'll find it. It's really mesmerizing. So on this map we get quite a bit of stuff. We have on the top we have east lie the Iron Hills. Where is Dane? Dane, I believe, is the dwarf relative that showed up at the end. I think the Lonely Mountain, which is where the quest is going to. Here was Girion, Lord of Dale, on the south side of the mountain. Hervold was that Thrain? Yes, Thrain, king under the mountain, on the east side of the running river. And here is the gateway of the Long Lake. So yeah, this is really great stuff. Let's just go back to main text. We have some introduction to the book, which I'm going to skip. Let's just go to. Okay, there we go. Phew, actually gonna happen. Chapter 1. Lost it a bit. I already lost it. I haven't even gotten to the title of the chapter. But let's make it formal. The Hobbit, written by J.R.R. Tolkien. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Party. So I will be like at least trying to do some voice acting, but I'm not good at it. I just um I can't really give you like 1,000 different voices or like uh accents from all across the region. I can't just on a whim do a Scottish accent. I barely know what that's gonna be like because English is already not a first language for me. So I'm just gonna do my best. I at least remember the movie version, so maybe I will be emulating that, but don't expect too much. That's what I'm saying. Okay, an unexpected party. In the hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened on a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with paneled walls and the floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs, and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The Hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles round called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. No going upstairs for the hobbit, bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these, lots of pantries hobbits like to eat, wardrobes. He had whole rooms devoted to clothes, kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor. That sounds like a dream, doesn't it? And indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left hand side going in, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep set round windows looking over his garden, and meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. This hobbit was a very well to do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighborhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. That's how you gain respect in this world, I guess. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbor's respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit. What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. I love that he's making this like a real thing. Like, oh, we don't see a lot of hobbits these days. Let me just describe them to you. I lost it again. Shit. There we go. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height and smaller than the bearded dwarfs. That explains it. Like we're asking, hey, what's a hobbit? Oh, they're a little shorter than the dwarves. That makes it so much more clearer. Hobbits have no beards. There's little or no magic about them, except the ordinary everyday sort, which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large, stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants which they can hear a mile off. They're inclined to be fat in the stomach, like me. They dress in bright colors, chiefly green and yellow. Like this green? Am I a hobbit? I can't rule that out. There we go. I lost it again. Every time I trail off, it's like a journey to go back to it. Wear no shoes because their feet grow natural leathery soles and a thick warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, which is curly. Have long, clever brown fingers, good natured faces, and laugh deep, fruity laughs. Ha ha ha! That wasn't a fruity laugh. Especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, of Bilbo Baggins that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the three remarkable daughters of the Old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said, in other families, that long ago, one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit like about them. And once in a while, members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up. But the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventure after she became Mrs. Bungle Baggins. Bungle, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money, that was to be found either under the hill, or over the hill, or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his makeup from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described for you, until he had in fact apparently settled down immovably. So Bilbo is in his 50s. Here's something I do know from the books is that the movie did not bother to explain this, and I think that that's the right choice. But apparently, hobbits they come of age in their 30s, and Frodo, both Bilbo and Frodo, when they had their adventures in the main story, they were in their 50s. I gotta say, Elijah Wood does not look like he's in his 50s, but that's the Hobbit age for you. But here's my question: if the hobbits have such a longer life than humans, and like they are actually in their prime in their 50s, is it such a wonder that Bilbo was celebrating his 111th birthday in Fellowship of the Ring? Because that was like a big deal. Like, wow, the hobbit that lived that long, that there's something unnatural about all this. But like if you're just the middle aged in your 50s, it doesn't seem it's so absurd that people can live to 100. And 111th, I think that would be like pretty good, but is it really that remarkable? Is it that unnatural? So some of you may know the answer to that. Now, where was I? Here we go. By some curious chance, one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed. Gandalf came by. Gandalf, if you had only heard a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you will be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Took died. In fact, and the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on businesses of his own since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointed blue head, a long grey cloak, a silver scarf over which his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. Oh, there we go, the first dialogue of the book. Okay. Good morning, said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining and the grass was very green, but Gandalf looked at him from under long bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. Wow. What do you mean? He said. Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning, whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning? Or that it is a morning to be good on? All of them at once, said Bilbo, and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors, into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry, we have all the day before us. Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful green ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. Very pretty, said Gandalf. But I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone. I should think so in these parts. We are plain quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them, said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided that it was not quite his sort, and wanted him to go away. But the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the hobbit, without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. Good morning, he said at last. We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water. By this he meant that the conversation was at an end. What a lot of things you do use good morning for, said Gandalf. Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that it won't be good till I move off. Not at all, not at all, my dear sir. Let me see, I don't think I know your name. Yes, yes, my dear sir, and I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins. And you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good morninged by Belladonna Took's son as if I was selling buttons at the door. Gandalf? Gandalf, good gracious me, no, the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered. Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at the parties about dragons and the goblins and the giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons. Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those. Old Took used to have them at Midsummer's Eve. Splendid. They used to go up like green lilies, and the snapdragons and the labyrinth what? And the labyrinths of fire and hang in the twilight of evening. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe. Also that he was very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on. Not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures. Anything from climbing trees to visiting elves or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite I mean, you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business. Where else should I be? Said the wizard. All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for. I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have. Twice now. My pardon. I give it to you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too. Very likely. If you ever get over it. Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea anytime you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. With that, the hobbit turned and scuttled inside his round green door, and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. What on earth did I ask him to tea for? He said to himself as he went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door and laughing long but quietly. You've seen the meme, you know what I'm talking about. After a while, he stepped up and, with a spike on his staff, scratched the queer sign on the hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode. the, the, the meaning of the word queer has changed a little bit. It's a little funny now. It's not supposed to be. Ah. Then he strolled away, just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake, and beginning to think that he had escaped the adventures very well. The next day, he had almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well, unless he put them down on his engagement tablet. Like this: Gandalf Tea Wednesday. Yesterday, he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front door bell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put down a kettle, and pulled out another cup and a saucer and an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. I'm so sorry to keep you waiting, he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf, with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside, just as if he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and Dwalin, at your service, he said with a low bow. But Bilbo Baggins at yours, said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, I'm just about to take tea. Pray come and have some with me. A little stiff, perhaps, but I meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung his things up in your hall without a word of explanation? I must to say I can relate. I don't know what I would do. They had not been at table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when there came another even louder ring at the bell. Excuse me, said the hobbit, and off he went to the door. So you have got here at last. This was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he had been invited. I see they have begun to arrive already, he said when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it, and Balin, at your service, he said with his hand on his breast. Thank you, said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they have begun to arrive had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host, he knew his duty and stuck to it, however painful. He might have to go without. Come along in and have some tea, he managed to say after taking a deep breath. A little beer would suit me better, if it is all the same to you, my good sir, said the Balin with a white beard. But I don't mind some cake. Seed cake, if you have any. Lots, Bilbo found himself answering, to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off, too, to the cellar to fill a pint beer mug, and then to a pantry to fetch two beautiful round seed cakes, which he had baked that afternoon for his after supper morsel. When he got back, Barley and the dwarling were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them. When loud came a ring at the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf for certain this time, he thought as he puffed along the passage. But it was not. It was two more dwarfs, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped. As soon as the door began to open, Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarfs?" he said. "Keely at your service," said the one, "and Feely," added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "Dwalling the Balin here already, I see," said Killy. Let us join the throne." "Throne?" thought Mr. Baggins. "I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He had only just had a sip in the corner, while the four dwarfs sat around the table and talked about the mines and gold and the troubles with the goblins and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand and he did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous. When ding dong a ling dong, that's what he said. I didn't make that up. His bell rang again as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Some at the door," he said, blinking. "Some four, I should say by the sound," said the filly. "Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance." The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened, and what was going to happen, and whether they would all stay to supper. Then the bell rang again louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not four at all, after all. It was five. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service," one after another. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were their names, and very soon two purple hoods, a grey hood, a brown hood, and a white hood, were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throne. I mean, these dwarves are just interchangeable. That has been the case in the movie as well. I remember the main ones. I remember the Thorin, the Balin, the Dwalin. I can't tell any of the others apart. I do remember some features about them. I remember one of them had an axe stuck inside his head. I remember one of them was almost deaf, so he had a bit of a hearing condition. So I remember that. But oh, there was the bomber, which was the big fat guy. So I think visually speaking, the movies did a pretty good job of differentiating these dwarves, even though you can't probably tell exactly who is who. When you, at least when you if you pause the movie and look at them, you can see that they do have very distinctive features. I doubt I will be able to like remember a lot about them in the books either, but we'll see. We'll actually read the book in detail and then see this time. Maybe the books do them more justice. All right, where was I? Hmm. Oh, they put their who they joined the party. Already had almost become a throne. Some called for ale, some called for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes. So the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set in the hearth. The seed cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on a round of buttered songs, when there came a loud knock, not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry, and altogether bewildered and bewildered. I don't know what that means, but I can guess. This was the most awkward Wednesday he had ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarfs, four more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he had put there the morning before. "Carefully, carefully," he said. "It is not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Biffer, Boffer, Bomber, and especially Thorin." So Thorin did not have the grand entrance like in the movie. He just fell onto Bilbo's mat. At your service, said the Biffa, Bolfer, and a Bomber standing in a row. Then they hang up two yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, in fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Biffer, Bolfer, and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty, and said nothing about the service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he granted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. Should give Thorin a distinct voice, maybe? "Pray don't mention it. I told you I can't do voice act." "Now we're all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that, tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said the Biffer. "And mince pipes in the cheese," said the Boffer. "And a pork pie and a salad," said the Bomber. "And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarfs through the door. "Put on a few eggs, there's a good fella," Gandalf called after him as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries. "And just bring out the old chicken and pickles." "Seems to know as much about this inside of my larders as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and the dishes and the knives and the forks and the glasses and the plates and the spoons and the things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confuse the gate and be bother these Confuse the gate and be bother these dwarfs," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Lo and behold, there stood the Barley and the Dwelling at the door of the kitchen, and the Feely and the Killy behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarfs all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarfs ate, and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and the Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and the glasses. "I suppose you will all stay to supper," he said in his politest unpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin. "And after all, and after all, we shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up." I mean, that wasn't supper, like all of that stuff. That was just afternoon tea. Thereupon the 12 dwarfs, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made a tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top, with one hand while the hobbit ran after them almost squeaking with fright. "Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage." But the dwarves only started to sing. Uh, okay, the following is a song. I don't know if I can do this. I vaguely remember this song from the movie, so I will try. Chip the glasses, crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins says. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread down the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocs in a boiling bowl. Pound them up with a thumping pole. And when you finish, if you are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully, carefully with the plates. I did not expect I would have to do this. And of course, they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and around in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went up the chimney, or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. The Gandalf smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about him already, and in the dim light, it made him look strange and the sorceress. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved the smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. Now for some music, said Thorin. Bring out the instruments. Well, that wasn't it. I'm starting to see a pattern. Like, we just had a feast, and then, oh, it's time for dinner. We just had a song, and oh, now for some music. Killy and Philly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dori, Norin, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Biffer and Bofer went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalling the Bowling said, "Excuse me, I left mine in the porch. Just bring mine in with you." Uh, just bring mine in with you, said Thorin. They came back with viols? Vials? It's spelled Viol. I don't know what that is. I'm gonna look it up. It's called a viol. I'm looking at Wikipedia. Uh, Stringed instrument with hollow wooden bodies in the packed boxes. Okay, I'll just know what it's called now. They came back with vials as big as themselves and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one, and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarfs in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Wow, we got a long song here. I don't know about this. Uh, I'm gonna. Okay, I was just singing the movie version. I think maybe I don't know if this is gonna work, but we'll see. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to seek the pale enchanted gold. I'm sensing that this is a little too slow. This is a long one. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, their many gleaming golden halls they shaped and wrought stone, and light they call to hide in gems on Hilda's soul. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung, the dragonfire in twisted wire. They match the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to claim our long forgotten gold. And it's still going, oh my god. God bless they carve there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man dwells. There lay their long and many a song was sang and heard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height. The winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread. The trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's iron more fierce than fire, laying low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoke beneath the moon. The dwarfs they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their home to dying fall. Beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day to win our harps and gold from him. And that was the end. Holy shit. That was like one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine paragraphs. How long have I been doing this? Like was that like 5 minutes long? That was like it felt like longer than an ordinary pop song in terms of length. Wow. That that took a lot out of me. I completely forgot that this was a thing. I just when I decided wanted to like read a book on streaming, I was like, oh, The Hobbit. I mean, that's a nice little children's tale. I've seen the movie, so there should be no problem. I forgot about the singing. How many of these do we have? I think what have I gotten myself into? As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands, and by cunning and by magic moving through him. A fierce and a jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. There's something Tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in the dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up, probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins of Bag End, Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until all the dwarfs had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about the little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We liked it dark," said all the dwarfs. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and the shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." And this is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and a fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out." May the hair on his toes never fall out. I challenge you guys to say this in the next toast that you propose, whatever the context, whatever the scenario. Just even if it's like wishing a happy birthday to your boss, I want you to say, "May the hair on his toes never fall out." All praise to his wine and ale. He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious and worst of all, fellow conspirator. Though no noise came out, he was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to us all. To the estimable Mr. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarfs. I think I should be right in naming Killian Feely, for instance. The exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation." This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. At the may never return, he began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarfs sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, struck by lightning," over and over again. And that was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fella," said Gandalf as they sat down again. "Gets funny, queer fits, but here's one of the best. One of the best. As fierce as a dragon in a pinch." If you have ever seen a dragon in the pinch, you will realize that this was only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great grand uncle Bullroarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Greenfields and knocked the king Golfinbus head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole. And in this way the battle was won, and the game of golf invented at the same moment. Sure, I'll believe that. In the meanwhile, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing room. After a while, and the drink crept nervously to the door of the parlor. This is what he heard, Glowing speaking. "Or some snort, more or less like that. Will he do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed at the breakfast to be thought fierce. As for a little fellow bobbing on a mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards, the Baggins pod regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it. Pardon me, he said. If I've overheard words that you were saying, I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about, or your references to burglars, but I think I'm right in believing, this is what he called being on his dignity, that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door, it was painted a week ago, and I'm quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts. But treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of east and fight the wild werewolves in the last desert, I had a great granduncle once, Borora took, and yes, but that was long ago, said the glowing. I was talking about you. And I assure you there is a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and a reasonable reward. That's how it is usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you'd like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday at tea time. Of course there is a mark, said Gandalf. I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. And just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like. I'll go back to digging coal. He scolded so angrily at Glowing that the dwarf huddled back in his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows, till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he's a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There is a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may, possibly, all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp, and let's have a little light on this. Oh, now you want light. I thought, what happened to dwarves liking the darkness for dark business? On the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. This was made by Thrall, your grandfather, Thorin, he said in answer to the dwarf's excited questions. It is a plan of the mountain. I don't see that this will help us much, said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough and the lands about it, and I know where Mirkwood is, and the withered heath where the great dragons bred. There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain, said Balin, but it will be easy enough to find him without that, if ever we arrive there. There is one point that you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is the secret entrance. You see that room on the west side? And the hand pointing to it from the other rooms? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map at the beginning of this book and you will see the runes. Oh! The rune on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other rooms that marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Is there now? Ah, the hand. Clever. Ooh, I lost it again. Give me a moment. Do. Aha. It may have been secret once, said Thorin. But how do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough now to find out anything there is to know about those caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Let me just grab myself some drink. Oh, that all that singing really did a number on my throat. This is tea, by the way. This is pour. It's my favorite. It's my favorite type of tea. But I just put it in the fridge for most of the time. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it is too small. 5 feet high the door, and three may walk abreast, say the runes. But is that what it says? You know what? I don't understand the runes, so I can't vouch for it. I'll take Gandalf's word for it. It seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved the maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all his favorite walks marked on it in red ink. How could such a large door be kept a secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf. And in what way this one has been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' method. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with the map went a key, a small and a curious key. Here it is, he said, and handed it to Thorin, a key with a long barrel and the intricate wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things began to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far we have had no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east as quiet and careful as we could, as far as the Long Lake. After that the trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. We might go from a, we might go from there up along the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there, under the shadow of the mountain. But we none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too, far too often, unless he has changed his habits. That would be no good, said the wizard. Not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. I like that they actually reference warriors and the heroes. The hero actually has a uh, caption H. So does warrior have a caption W? Well, it's kind of funny, like in the more traditional heroes and the dragons fantasy stories, you find that the warrior, the hero, right? Like the guy with the shining armor and the sword. That's the guy that's chosen to go on quests like this and go fight dragons. But in this case, Gandalf's like, oh, those guys they're unavailable. So we gotta do the dirty work. A bunch of dwarves and a hobbit, and Bilbo had just this short little hobbit who's never had any, never been adventurous, has to take the role of the hero. I like that. And that's also a theme in the movies in both trilogies. That it's the little people that changes the world. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees, and the shields as cradles or dish covers, and the dragons are comfortably far off and are therefore legendary. That is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remember the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and the selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans. Excuse me. To drink. Very well then, said Thorin. Supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions, he turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and a bit shaken inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean, about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin. Haven't you got a map? And didn't you hear our song? And haven't we been talking about all this for hours? All the same, I should like it all plain and clear, said he obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who try to borrow money of him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth. By which I meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, in my grandfather Thrall's time, our family was driven out of the far north and came back with all their wealth and the tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor Thrain the Old. But now they mined and they tunneled and they made huger halls and greater workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men, who lived to the south and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths, and reward even the least skillful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and the leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it. Not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's house became full of armor and the jewels and the carvings and the cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. That was a lot of exposition. Undoubtedly, that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and the dwarves, wherever they can find them. And they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they're killed, and they never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value. Really? Smaug knows like how the value of gold nowadays? And they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armor. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and the gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and the destruction the dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most especially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees and the mountain creaking and cracking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and they saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off, we saw a dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods, they all went up in fire. By that time, all the bells were ringing in Dale and the warriors were arming. The dwarves rushed out of their great gate, but there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that way. The river rushed up in steam and a fog fell on Dale, and in the fog the dragon came on them and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front gate, and then routed out all the halls, and lanes, and the tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions, and the passages. After that, there were no dwarfs left alive inside, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably, for that is the dragon's way, He has piled it all up in the great heap far inside, and sleeps on it for a bed. Later he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now, I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. So dragons, one of the common things that has always perplexed me is this dragon's fascination for gold. I mean, they don't spend it. They don't need money, and it's also written like that in the novel here that like they just hoard the gold. They're attracted to it, but they don't use it. They don't trade anything. They don't need to trade anything. They don't really need money, but they just want a lot of it. That's gotta be really bad for the market. The few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding, and a cursed smoke. But there we were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. When I asked how they had got away, they told me to hold my tongue, and said that one day in the proper time I should know. After that we went away, and we have had to earn our livings as best as we could, and down the lands, often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we have never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now, when I will allow we have a good bit laid by, and not so badly off. Here Thorin stroked the gold chain around his neck. We still mean to get it back, and bring our curses home to Smoke, if we can. I have often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door, which only they knew about, but apparently they made a map. And I should like to know how Gandalf got hold of it, and why it did not come down to me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it, I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thrall was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. So it's Azog the Goblin, not the pale orc like in the movie. I don't think Azog is gonna have a really a main role in the novel, but we'll see. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And the Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago, last Thursday, and has never been seen by you since. True, true, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give it to you, and if I've chosen my own time and the way for handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours. So on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said he, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety, before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had. But he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the Necromancer. Dol Guldur. Okay, in the movie, if you watch the extended edition of Desolation of Smoke, the you know the part where Gandalf goes to Dol Guldur to confront the Necromancer and it turns out to be Sauron and all that. That little subplot in the movie didn't go very long in the theatrical version, but it's very much expanded in the special edition or the extended edition. They actually he actually finds Thrain there, Thorin's father. Is that his name, Thrain? And in that part of the movie, they tried to escape together, but the Thrain was did not make it. They also showed that his finger was cut off, so they knew that somebody had his ring. Yeah, the Hobbit movie, they tried to do a little too much, in my opinion. But I also feel like they really try to do as good of a job as the resources they had. I just feel like The Hobbit is not the best book to adapt to movies, but let's get on with it. I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the Necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He has an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. If they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world, the one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it aloud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered that he answered, Hear what I have got to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there's the side door, and the dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. And, well, don't you know, I think we have talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed, and an early start, and all that? I will give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't the sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about bed and the breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham when starting on the journey. Fried, not poached. And mind you, don't break them. 6 eggs. And after all the others had ordered the breakfast without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The hobbit had to find room for them all, and filled all his spare rooms and made beds on chairs and the sofas, before he got them all stowed and went to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was not now quite so sure that he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. Oh no, not again. Far over the misty mountains cold, the dungeons deep and caverns old. We must away ere break of day to find our long forgotten gold. Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up. And there you go. That was the first chapter called An Unexpected Party. That was really good. I had a lot of fun reading it. And it's a really good storytelling too. I always feel like the Hobbit book in my impression of that this is the first time I really read it in such detail. But my impression of it is always like it's a simple story, but it's like written very well. And I think I have to end it here because my voice is going. I did not expect. This is a very long chapter, by the way. It's 18 chapters, really. So the book must be longer than I thought it was. Anyway, thanks for watching. I am going to end the stream now, and I will be porting this video to YouTube too. So I intend to finish reading at least this book. So we'll see what happens. And yeah, I don't think there's practically no one in the chat right now. So hopefully more people will join the party as we go on. But regardless, I intend to finish this. So thanks for watching. See you next time.